Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Barry, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I couldn't be more thrilled to be back in Ann Arbor. I'm with the Learning Science Program. I'm with the other CRLT, the much smaller CRLT, the Center for Research on Learning and Technology at Indiana University. Let me start with some acknowledgments. This work is supported by the MacArthur Foundation. I'll also talk about some work funded by Google. Prior National Research Foundation funding has been crucial in the work that I'm doing, but also some small grants, some of these small internal ones that sometimes you can leverage really well. But I want to take a second and make some broader acknowledgments to a whole bunch of people who have really helped me in my work. In particular, I'll start with Paul Pintrich. I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for his encouragement many years ago. My advisor was Jim Pellegrino. I studied at Vanderbilt. I was part of the Learning Technology Center at Vanderbilt. And to give you an idea of where I'm coming from in this work, my background, I'm trained as more of a psychometrician. I really learned to measure stuff and measure cognitive processes, motivation, achievement, understanding. So throughout my career, I've been blessed with opportunities to collaborate, really doing innovative assessment practices around some of the leading innovations developed by some of the leading innovators, Sasha Barab, Janet Kolodner, Steve McGee, NASA Classroom of the Future, Henry Jenkins, Jim G. So I've really been blessed to be able to hang out with them and do what I do, which is really, in my work more broadly, is taking the challenges associated with assessing and motivating learning and looking at them primarily from a situative perspective. I was trained as a cognitivist and as a postdoc at ETS in the 90s. Something happened in the 90s, and that was between the time I accepted my postdoc and the time I got there, the entire US alternative assessment movement collapsed. Our center was set up to fund and to run, in particular, the California Learning Assessment System. And just political pressure, lack of reliability, and the challenges of large-scale assessment reform, it just basically died. That was cool because it freed me up to do what I really wanted to do, which was do innovative assessment around the GenScope software that was developed by Paul Horowitz. So that was at the time where I really started rethinking situative theories, particularly Jim Greeno's work, Jim G's work, and began, in particular, Pam Moss's thinking about assessment became very influential. So what I've basically been doing for most of my career is saying, like, okay, how can we think very differently about assessment and about motivation, primarily from a situated perspective, thinking particularly about Jim Greeno's theoretical orientation? How does it help us solve sort of practical, enduring, nagging problems in education? And almost all my work has done that. The project I'm going to talk about today is a little bit different. It's more of an ethnography. It's more of a study of the design principles emerging out of this movement known as digital badges. So I'll start by saying, how many of you have earned a digital badge? How many of you have pushed a badge out to a backpack, to a Mozilla backpack? Where'd you earn that badge?
It was just a very introductory Mozilla badge that you could
Okay. Anyone else push a badge besides Badges 101 badge to their backpack? May I ask what it was?
It was badges that we set up for in the School of Information conference that we had.
So that was my next question. How many of you have actually decided what claims about learning and what evidence about those claims that you would put in a digital badge? Just one. Okay. My first piece of advice, if you want to really understand badges, go through the process of that I'll illustrate here. The real thing I want to say is badges are nothing but information. It's an image and 8 metadata fields defined that is now called the Open Badge Infrastructure. And in the end, a badge is really just information. The important thing is this information about learning can be accumulated internally on a sort of a learning management system, but also externally. It can move out of your silos and into a shared space where they can be accumulated. They can be shared over email and social networks really easily. Not LinkedIn, they're not playing yet. You would just have to post your URL. But if you get a badge and you post it to Facebook, the image will appear, as I'll show you. Fundamentally, the important thing is they contain specific claims about learning, and this is why badges are so much different than anything that came before. Grades, transcripts, credentials. They tend not to make specific claims. They make general statements, and they rely on the institutional reputation of whoever issued that badge. And they contain evidence in support of those claims. And whatever this evidence is up to the issuer. You can choose to include links to student-produced artifacts, class syllabi, all kinds of stuff. Whatever evidence you think should be included in that badge to convince a observer of that badge that the claims that you're making about achievement or learning are valid. So let me show, I'm going to show you 3 examples of some digital badge systems. So in this case, supporter to reporter in the UK, soccer fans are called supporters. They support their team. And these awesome people, Cliff and Lucy, have had this program for a while called Make Waves, where they're one of the awardees that I'll be talking about, one of the projects I've been asked to study. This is their core website, S2R. So kids can earn medals, badges. They were medals before they got the DML grant. They were awarded a grant to translate what they had been calling medals into OBI-compliant digital badges. This is their core website. It's a very nice piece of work, really well done. They've done the homework to integrate their informal, non-school learning activities into school settings. They've made it easy for teachers to give credit to students for work that they're doing outside of school. So to use Pam Moss's, the language Pam Moss taught me, that badges are serving as a boundary object of carrying this credential. And that's one of the really important functions of badges. And so this is, so let's go to, so Glenn is an active participant here. So if you go to Glenn's page, you're going to see that Glenn's a pretty happening guy. He's got 55 friends in this interest-driven social network, to use Mimi Ito's distinction. He's done 80 stories, 6 blogs, 13 badges. He's got a lot of profile views. There's his stories. And here's one of the badges he earned. And this is literally what a badge looks like. The Youth Sports Trust decided on this image, they gave it this name. And most importantly, they defined this evidence link. So this is the evidence in support of him earning this badge. So let me pull this over. So it turns out this is an interview with a wheelchair racer. Notice good audio right away, nice graphics. These are high school kids.
So I'm Hannah Cockcroft MBE. I am double Paralympic gold medalist from London 2012, double world champion, 24-time world record breaker. Done a few things in my career. I'm a wheelchair racer. I race the 100 uncompeting in the Sainsbury's school games. I'd say to them, have fun, but remember what you're here to do. Focus on your event and focus on your performance, because this could be the starting block of an incredible career.
Thank you very much for your time.
So it's very inspiring. Again, nice production values for high school journalism.
To pronounce the Sainsbury's 2013 school games officially open.
So that's pretty good stuff. That's one example of one of the educational ecosystems that, in this case, already had a web-enabled credentialing system built into it, which has now had the Mozilla Open Badges infrastructure overlaid onto it. It turns out that's very important, whether or not you had an ecosystem that you added that had web-enabled credentialing that you then transformed into badges. Nicole Pinkard, who graduated with Barry from Northwestern, the Digital Youth Network. Did anybody hear of Chicago Summer of Learning? Yeah, so this is a big deal. I was a little, at first, I was like, oh, nobody asked me to be involved. And then I realized, oh my God, what a blessing that was. Because Rahm Emanuel just turned on the jets, man, and said, we are going to have a summer of learning, and you're going to do it. So they really, really kicked out the jams, and you know, it was a qualified success. Many aspects of it were really a struggle to get it in place in the time, but you know, thousands of badges were issued, and dozens of informal learning providers came together to organize all of these summer learning activities around digital badges, and one of the most successful ones was Nicole's Digital Youth Network. Here you see on the left, you see the badges that are available to students in her ecosystem, and it truly is an ecosystem because it's connecting many different content providers. Here you see in the middle, this is, you can see that this one badge up here is the citizen science badge, and that is the OBI compliant badge. Down here, these little icons, these are sort of more internal badges, and this is one of the points I want you to take away about badges, is, as Nicole points out, they provide a pathway. They're both discoverable, so students who want to learn about stuff, it kind of says like, you can earn this badge, so if you want to discover opportunities to learn, badges have a lot of affordances to do that. Once you've discovered that opportunities, badges within learning environments provide a pathway for learners to follow. This is different than if you think about the artificially intelligent tutors that have a very well-defined, a very prescriptive pathway where each activity, each learning step motivates you to do another one. It has some of those same motivational affordances whereby earning one badge provides you the incentive to go on and do the next one. And getting that pathway right and using learning analytics to do it is one of the things that I think Nicole is really going to accomplish. Ugochi Analu is their learning analyst. They have an eager grant from NSF specifically focusing on the volumes of data, but this is what that stuff looks like. This is Strong Sheeps. This is what he had to do to earn this badge. That's all of his evidence. He actually, in the end, did a good high school study looking at the difference of rodent activity around trash receptacles with and without lids. Nice little, pretty good summer of learning activity. I'll let Chris Haskell.
Mark student progress. In traditional learning environments, the 3D game lab uses badges to mark student progress. Traditional learning environments that use evidential, they show what we know in more granular.
Sorry, I botched that.
In 3D game lab evidential, they show what we know in more granular, usable ways. In 3D game lab, teachers can make badges that represent important standards or parts of the curriculum. Badges can even be created for specializations within a class. Using the new Mozilla OBI, badges earned in 3D Game Lab can now be shared across the web using your digital backpack. Imagine earning a badge in your science class to get you a raise at work. Or what if you could take a training at work that would give you credit in your science class? That's the power of digital badges using 3D Game Lab.
So over there on the right, you see that is Connie Yowell on the stage with Bill Clinton. Connie is more than anyone responsible for this project. Arnie Duncan announced it in 2011. And there they are in early 2013 promising Bill Clinton along with, that's Mark Surman, the head of the Mozilla Foundation, a hugely important figure in all this work, and David Theo Goldberg of UC Irvine promising Bill Clinton that we're going to issue 2 million OBI compliant digital badges, I think by the end of the year. I don't think we're quite going to make it, but we're close. That's not my problem. So now let me give you one much more detailed example that's near and dear to my heart because it's my class. When Barry asked me to come up and talk, I wasn't sure. I sent him two abstracts. One was about this BOOC, this big open online course, and one was about badges. So he said, definitely people are interested in badges, learning analytics, but I get to make some of the key points about badges and learning analytics drawing on this. So I'll take a little while, and plus I'm really proud of it. It's going really well. So this is a course that I've been teaching online since 2007, but teaching since about 2000, your standard classroom assessment, helping teachers, administrators learn to do better when it comes to assessing learning outcomes. Like all of my work, I have a very participatory approach to personalized learning. Rather than self-paced, individualized mastery of established concepts, rather what I do is I get all of the participants to define, in this case, a very meaningful curricular aim and build their understanding of their role in the educational system and continually revisit this. This is a core situative instructional implication. So you want students to co-construct their knowledge of their experience and their context as they're constructing understanding of the concepts you want them to learn. So in order to register for my BOOC this time, you actually had to complete that step, which used to be part of the first assignment. So before anyone could even be admitted to the course, they had to understand at some level the difference between a lesson and a curricular aim. Because you really can't understand assessment if you don't understand the difference between the practices of teaching and the processes of learning. So Students go in, they define themselves, we assign them to networking groups, and they work in small networking groups with peers within and across groups across 12 weeks. We use a textbook in this course. We supplement it with outside readings. The badges serve to organize this class. It's really simple to say, this class, there's 3 badges. You're going to earn an assessment practices badge, principles badge, and policies badges. There's 3 expertise badges that you're going to earn by completing 3 or 4 weekly Wikifolio assignments and getting 80% on the exam. And if you earn all 3 of those and you get 80% on a comprehensive final, you're going to get an assessment expert badge, which you can customize and actually put the name of your state, your context, your discipline, whatever you want to say that relative to your peers, you now you may call yourself an expert. Again, within reason, you took 1 course. Now, there's also leader badges. The students who get the most promotions from their peers also can earn a badge, and I'll come back to that. We started with 460 registrants in September. I called it a big open online course. We didn't want to do massive because we really think that to make the shift from the small, intuitive 20-person, 30-person 4-credit class, if we had jumped up to the Coursera level, it would have just, we wouldn't have been able to do some of the magic that my programming and that my team have been doing to still foster this kind of interactive participatory learning, but at a scale of hundreds. We're down to about 80 active students now. We're 2 weeks away from the end. This includes 8 students who are enrolled for credit. So 8 of these students paid in-state tuition to get university credit for this. 4 of them were ones who needed it to graduate with their master's, but 4 of them were ones who said, oh man, I can get credit for this, my employer will pay for it, I'll go ahead and do it. So those students are required to do all of the assignments, and they also get more input and more interaction from me as the instructor. So let me show you what this thing, it's actually not a wiki anymore. I did this in Sakai, using the Sakai wikis, which have a lovely threaded commenting function. My programmer, Thomas Smith, is a genius. What you see up top those are comments waiting for my reply. So you can see there's the assignments. You can open them, close them back up. And these are just simple edit windows. And so each student each week is asked to reiterate their curricular aim and their context. So they're asked to say, the assignment tells them, you know, what is the role in this case? This assignment is on standardized testing. This was 2 weeks ago. What is the role of standardized testing? What does standardized testing mean in your context? In this case, Rick he works in the Army. So he's taking the Defense Language Proficiency Test. So one of the cool things that he did was, I won't go to it, but these little drag and drop boxes. So this is a central piece of pedagogy across all of my curriculum is, you can really get people to engage in targeted concepts by asking them to rank the relevance of those concepts for their context. So in this case, Rick was asked to say, here's these 3 ways of interpreting standardized tests: scale scores, percentiles, grade equivalent scores. I've been teaching this class for 10 years, and it's a kind of thing, it's really a struggle with this population to really, in the abstract, understand what those things mean. And by having them debate first with themselves and then with each other, which one is most relevant. So what he's done there is, you see, he's drag and dropped them, and this is where the learning analytics come in. That means that ranking comes back to us as data, right? We don't have to go in and extract that information to provide feedback, but he's also has to go in here and come up with a rationale for why this one's most relevant and this one's least relevant. And that's one of the key things we've discovered, is that when you require someone to decide to articulate why something is least relevant, it's a really good opportunity for discourse, because often they underrepresent it. And it's a really nice opportunity for classmates and instructors to come in and say, well, I can see how that's relevant. Sometimes you see people changing their ranking. So that turns out to be a very useful technique to get students to engage in what Randy Engel helped me realize is best called productive disciplinary engagement. First and foremost, getting them to engage productively in disciplinary knowledge. But again, I'm not here to talk about that course, but I just wanted to share some of those cool things. But one thing is that drag and drop thing means that that data comes to us right now as a spreadsheet. Very soon, hopefully by the end of the course, as a real-time ranking, so students can see as they contribute their vote. They can see, for instance, in the validity section, it's not a trivial thing that the teachers ranked content validity more relevant whereas the administrators ranked criterion validity more relevant. It's a way of providing personalized feedback at scale that we spend a lot of time looking at in our work. So even with 80, and that's a fairly typical amount of text. There is the optional parts, right? There's the required parts. And then here's the discussion, threaded discussion, including some comments from me, right? That is way too much, even in small scale, to grade. And furthermore, if you do, you mess up the whole dynamic, all of the lovely discourse that can happen around student-created artifacts. And so previously in my online classes, as long as these reflections, I talked about this with the students some before, as long as these reflections are coherent and they've completed the assignment, I give them all their points. You just don't go through and nitpick an artifact, for the purpose of taking away a half a point, because then students just want to argue about that instead of arguing about the disciplinary knowledge. But at scale, even that isn't possible. So I'm really proud of the way this thing worked, which is part of the assignment is you're required to endorse your classmates, endorse up to at least three of your classmates as being complete. This is not peer assessment, this is peer endorsement. Yeah, it looks like they completed either the required or the required and the optional parts. And there you see, Rick, quite a few people endorsed it. I did as well, although normally I don't. I actually did it playing around with it. But then over here we have this, what we call, this is peer promotion. So you are also instructed to identify one and only one. You're only allowed to promote one as being exemplary, and you have to say why it's exemplary. So this is what this other leader badge is associated with. For each of those three sections, the student who gets the most of those promotions from their classmates is awarded the leader badge out of about 10 to 20 people. They really like these things. These things are really, really valued. We know when we've done little tweaks to the class, like a big chunk of this is how do you provide feedback? Right, so for example, one of the routines that we're working on scaling up is this combination of early feedback and whole class feedback. Typically the early posters are the most experienced and the most ambitious students. So it's a really good context for me and a guest instructor for some weeks to come in and provide very contextualized feedback and bring in more advanced concepts that would otherwise overwhelm the less ambitious students. So we'll go in, give a ton of feedback, reward that student for posting early, and then put up an announcement saying, hey, go look at this before you start your assignment. And what you find is that students, they start reading it doesn't make any sense to them. They go start working on their assignment, and then they have enough experience in that context to make sense of that other more complex information. So we do that, and then at the end, that's the early feedback. And then when everybody's said and done, we give feedback on the whole group, focusing on how different groups rank the relevance of things, and included hot links to specific students. So everybody reads that, partly because they want to see if they got a shout out, if people said to go look at it. So that's the core.
Can I ask a question about the exemplary?
Yeah.
At what point do they do those nominations? Have they seen the entire set of sources, or how are they able to judge?
It depends. We don't really, that's, so I had the pleasure of working with Henry Jenkins, who's a media scholar, and it really drew a lot from his and Mimi Ito's study of social networks. If you can't control them, what you want to do is create them so that that process is credible. First and foremost, if you put too much structure in it, there's a risk that students are going to prank it or game it, and you will lose the credibility of that badge. So I don't really know the answer to that question, but I have a former student and 2 staff members enrolled in the course, and I'm asking them to take it for real and then report back to me how they do it. And I will ask them that exact question.
Does exemplary suggest better than others?
Yeah, and but again, they're not going to look at all 80. We know, and I've studied this, one of my advisees is a lecturer in telecom, and we've used a similar approach, and we've systematically studied, for instance, commenting and voting within your group, out of your group, and both within and between. So it's a very important question. In this setting, I'd say, I mean, we could probably study, this is exactly the kind of question with the learning analytics. We're building in stuff. We can probably answer that question. How many unique visits come to each page? We'll be able to start tracking. And when we implement this class again this summer, that's exactly the kind of stuff that I hope I'll have a definitive answer on. So It's all about the evidence, right? This is my evidence page for my badge. This is what the students see. There you see, this is, tells me all about my stuff. And here are all our opportunities to share this badge, assessment practice. Here's what I had to do. Now notice I have 0 promotions because this is me, not a student, 4 comments. And if I were to post that to Mozilla to an open badge, it's pretty simple. You just go, okay, I want to send it out to my badge or out to my backpack. Now it's not going to let me because I already sent it there. So, but we'll go visit the backpack. This is what the Mozilla backpack looks like. Very well designed, it's a nice interface. And the cool thing about it is that you can make collections. And then, so this tells me, this is how your portfolio will look like to the public. If I send that URL to someone, or if I post that URL to LinkedIn or Facebook, this is what people see. Now, notice I've been able to say what it is. I've added more context to this evidence to make it more meaningful, but I've also come over here and filled in, this is a fill, when I edit this page, I fill this in. I got this badge for figuring out how to use the Open Badge Issuer gadget in Google Sites. And here's my badge that I earned, right? Now I get to say here, I didn't really earn this badge. In fact, this is a badge I'm giving away. But the cool thing is when that's open to the public, they get to go in, and they get to see, we have elected to make it possible for students to display the artifacts that they completed and all of the other information, and they have a lot of control over that. So that's what we mean by putting a lot of information in the badges. That's what it looks like at Facebook, right? You actually see the image, and if you click on that in Facebook, you will see this again. And this is what she tweeted. That's what you see, and that's what we mean when we say that these badges can be accumulated and shared readily. It's very simple to do, and that it's up to me as the issuer to decide how much evidence to put in that badge.
Can you recap one more time the platform?
Sure.
You mentioned Mozilla. I get that there's a...
Okay, so great question. In my case, my platform is Google Course Builder, which is their open source platform, which is recently announced that they have merged with OpenEdX. So much of my work is driven by the likelihood, the very strong likelihood, that this merger, which will be called MOOC.org, which should kick in about June, is probably going to do to open learning what Gmail did to Hotmail and email in general. It's probably going to become the gorilla in open learning. So in this case, I'm using Course Builder 1.4, required a substantial amount of Python programming. 1.5 is out, can be done entirely with HTML. What that ends up being merged will be much more like a typical course management system where you won't need to know HTML either. And so my programmer, Thomas Smith, built in these badge routines into it. They're very modularized, and they're ready to be ported out to anybody else who's using Course Builder 1.5. Did I answer your question? Yeah. So this is Sharon, one of the students who earned her badge, and I've been blogging about this at Remediating Assessment, where if you're interested in the stuff at Remediating Assessment at blogspot.com. There's quite a bit of stuff. I don't have a blog up about the badges yet, but it should be up this week. She was like, I was surprised at how excited I was when my badge was issued. I immediately shared it with my family members, and particularly those who educate. This is what we mean about the peer networking. Now that's very good advertisement for my BOOC. I don't know if you noticed, but when you go and look at the evidence page, there's a little line on the bottom that says, click here if you're interested in, if you want to sign up, right? We spent $4,000 on a Facebook campaign to generate those 400 registrants. Now, if we can get 100 of these people to get these badges out there circulating, could there be any better advertisement? That's what we mean by discovering learning opportunities. That's different. That didn't happen without badges. So I don't know whether asking whether badges work is the right question. Are badges working? I think they are. I mean, they're doing things, they're making things possible that didn't happen before. Yes?
Well, use grades as an alternative example. But grades offer some sort of stakes. They introduce stakes to the setting. In a low stakes setting, what does your gut tell you about if you were to offer badges versus no stakes at all?
A certificate. So, I mean, I can use my specific example. About half of these people are eligible to get professional development credit. So we offer an instructor verified certificate that they can scan and upload because the whole idea of badges are. So it's still an informal setting. It's pretty wide open. So people, you know, to some of these other projects that I showed you, which were more informal, many of the students are participating without any formal credit associated with it. So it's up to you to sort of make the badge valuable. You have to ask yourself, what do we have to do to make this badge so meaningful that somebody's going to put it out to Facebook? People don't tweet their grades. So, and I'll return to that with this study. This is exactly what we're studying in the Design Principles Documentation Project. Yes?
Sort of a related question. I've been wondering what motivates students to participate to earn the badge, and if you tried to compare this with other mechanisms for motivation, or quantitative comparisons like I don't know.
I'll come back to it.
Okay.
I would say that's probably premature since we don't really know how to use badges yet. So in 2012, much fanfare, or 2011, Arnie Duncan announced this competition. Media, lots of media, Chronicle of Higher Ed, tons of stories. They got 600 proposals of people who wanted to develop content for digital badges. In the end, a very complex matching system. MacArthur loves to do this stuff really complicated. They ended up awarding 3 major grants to platforms, including Mozilla, to do the OBI infrastructure, and 30 content developers. And I was asked to basically study, in a very ethnographic sense, not support them, but study the principles for using digital badges that emerge over the approximately year and approximately $100,000 to $200,000 of each of those projects. I'll take a second here, shout out for my awesome team. Rebecca Ito is a doctoral student of mine at IU. Kat Schenke and Kathy Tran are students of Amory Conley at Irvine. They are heading up the motivation strand. Rebecca's doing assessment. Nate is my project coordinator. Christine Chow is heading up credentialing, and I'm heading up the studying. And I'll come back to that in a second. But I also want to say Haystack, which is a collaborative in humanities, arts, science, and technology collaboratory at Duke University. They have been charged with providing the actual support to these 30 projects to get their badges underway. Mozilla, who's an amazing organization, are shepherding this broader community that's emerging, including the 570 projects, the unfunded winners, they called them at the time. Many of them who, by the way, are doing way better than the funded projects. So these are those projects. Look down there in the lower right, you see Design for America, which was a design collective, web-based design collective, and then the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum, both about design. Then you also see the national, so what you see there is 2 projects about design and 2 projects about museums. You'd think that they'd have a lot in common. Maybe, maybe not. So much of what we're trying to do is capture the insights. What is it about these 2 different museum contexts? 2 weeks ago, the Mathers Museum, which is our campus anthropology museum, said, hey, we want to use digital badge. And I said, well, it turns out 2 of our projects were museums. So let's take the wisdom that we've gathered, package it, and share it with you, and see if you find it useful. So that's sort of that was really great timing for us. It turns out the 2 museum projects we studied were very, very different. And figuring out why some of them planned to do the same things, but they worked in some setting in one place, and they didn't work at all in another place. Finding out what contextual factors made it possible to use badges in one way, but not another way, is very important knowledge that we're trying to capture and share out. So Carla Casilli is an information sciences person at Mozilla Foundation, and I draw a lot of inspiration from this. Regardless of where you start, it's likely you end up somewhere other than your intended destination. Systems are living things, and your badge system needs to be flexible. You need to embrace a bit of chaos in its design, and it has been chaotic. Badges are both transformative and disruptive. Philip Crutchin works in, anybody know this guy's work? This is fairly obscure work, but it's software architecture design. Bill Penuel helped me find this work. Most of the knowledge generated when designing complex systems evaporates as features evolve and teams dissolve. Many of these projects don't remember why they put something in their proposal in the first place because they've iterated so far. We're trying to capture that trial and error knowledge. We do that first by identifying 4 functions of badges. This is where this project really draws on my work in assessment. I argue pretty strongly that the prevailing focus on assessment purposes is misguided. To say that an assessment is formative, what's formative teachers is likely relatively summative for students. And high-stakes tests can be, if it's done right, might be formative for policymakers, but they're by definition summative for teachers. So I really pushed this focus on functions, and I was pleased to see that this is one of the things out of our project that seems to have permeated this community is these functions. Badges, in the end, are a credential. They're used to recognize learning. If you're going to recognize learning, you have to have some sort of assessment. You have to have some sort of way of generating evidence of that learning. Once you're recognizing and assessing learning, you're impacting motivation whether you admit it or not. But it's starting to get a little loosey-goosey here, right? Like what it means to motivate depends on what you think it means to engage in learning. So it's getting more and more sort of general. And finally, categories of studying learning. If there's one point that I'd like to leave you all with today in the learning analytics community, it's that the evidence contained in digital badges has the potential to transform learning analytics because of the process that it has to go through. So the badges themselves contain evidence, and it's a very different kind of learning analytics than, I think, kind of anything else. We looked at the intended practices. We took their awarded proposals and we scrutinized them for what were their intended practices in those 4 areas. Most of them had tons of stuff about their intentions for recognizing learning, some pretty good stuff on assessing, maybe not on motivation, and very little on studying. Then we interviewed them once they were underway, once they were really in the trenches, about 6 months in, saying, okay, that's what you intended to do. What are you trying to do? In other words, what are your enacted practices? Almost about 2/3 of them said they were going to do peer assessment. And 2/3 of those ended up not doing it. Some of them because it was really hard in Drupal to set up the interface, but other ones because peer assessment when stakes are attached is a really hard thing to do right. So that's, in other words, how did their intentions unfold and what are the contextual factors that allowed some intentions to succeed and prevented some intentions from succeeding, but also revealed new possibilities that they hadn't anticipated. That's going back to Carla's point. It's very chaotic. You have to embrace the chaos. And it really was quite chaotic for some of them. Some of them just was amazing watching, very carefully crafted partnerships just implode. Just go all to hell because they just couldn't quite get it together. And then finally, we're shifting gears now. What are the formal practices? The money's gone. You no longer have a staff member dedicated to this badges project. What are you doing? Are you still issuing badges? That's probably the most relevant practices of all, is what are people able to do when the money's gone? They're formal practices. And we're right now shifting gears and we're beginning a final round where we ask people, 6 months ago you said you were trying to do this. Did that work? Why or why not? So, right, now the projects there, notice I was previously talking about practices. Now I want to talk about principles, right? They say, oh, we're not researchers. Well, they are researchers. They're researching systematic practices for using badges in their context. They are being systematic about that. They're not systematically deriving a broader set of principles. That's our job, is to try to look across them to see what can we learn looking systematically across these groups of people. So we took those enacted practices, put them on cards and literally did a card sort, literally did a clustering to try to find what are the more general, more broader categories of principles, aiming for about 4 to 6 principles for each of those 4 functions. We actually ended up with more of those. From that, we identified an initial set of general principles. Now, the important thing is these general principles, as I'll show you, can be exemplified by linking them back to the projects that enacted them. We think that is knowledge that is both useful and, as we're finding, is being used by projects. We're drawing a lot of inspiration from design-based research, a lot of drawing on Barry's work and looking at design-based implementation research has been really helpful. I am a design researcher in all my work, and so this notion of meta principles, general principles, specific principles, and specific features, and moving back and building local theory in the process of moving back and forth across those levels. That's, for me, and for many of us in the learning sciences, that's the appropriate place right now for doing theorizing around something that is this new and this sort of, we don't know how to do it. Then finally, the really fun thing, and this is where this is particularly good for my graduate students, is finding the relevant research. There is one peer-reviewed article on digital badges right now. Sam Abramovich, out of one of the funded projects at Carnegie Mellon, one single peer-reviewed article in educational technology research and development. It's a really relatively modest study that basically looks at correlations between individual differences and badge awarding. And like I said, yeah, we're going to have them. We're going to find them. It's not, we're going to definitely get that. But so for instance, I know a lot about peer assessment. I know a lot about portfolio assessment. And I know how to sort of link that research or those blog posts, and much of it's out there in the blog sphere, back to these practices so that when somebody's in there struggling and all of a sudden goes, oh my God, should our portfolios be public or private? Well, not only do we have one project with portfolios that's public and one project that's private, I know of some work by work in CSCL that talks about public and private artifacts. And our job is to get that research right in the right place in this knowledge network so that when a practitioner or researcher needs it, they know it's there. So that's a big chunk of our work. And in the end, our report will have 4 major sections with this relevant research literature. But our goal is to get those out into, you know, review of educational research review, and get for a review of the motivation, relevant motivation literature, and really saying, because we have to do that if this knowledge is going to connect with this broader scholarly community. So what, I think, do people have to leave at 1? I'm a little, okay.
Some people have to leave, but.
Okay, it is 1, so I'll take a second here and see if anybody needs to get up and go, or maybe take a question before I talk about the results. Trying to get quickly to the learning analytics stuff. Yes?
You mentioned portfolios, and I've been curious about the relationship between a badged backpack and an e-portfolio.
A lot of, like Moodle Mahara is one of the platform awardees. I'd say about half of them are using web-enabled credentials to recognize student-generated digital artifacts, to technologize the language. And it, you know, it's happening in different ways. Some of them are doing better than others. Some of it's very conventional, but that's a huge chunk of it.
But are they fundamentally 2 different things, or are they
Yeah,
just
one.
different instances?
They are
of
definitely different things. The badge is the
technology,
credential.
essentially?
Functionally, I mean, the badge is the credential, the portfolio is the artifact, and the badge serves as a recognition of the artifact. So here's what we found. These are the principles for recognizing learning ordered by prevalence. Here's the principles for assessing learning ordered again by prevalence. What I want to show you in this next one is what you see is that underneath that first principle, 10 of the projects, when they use leveled badge systems, use what we deemed competency levels, whereas 8 of them used meta badges. So this is what we mean by trying to gather up this information and share it out in this knowledge network. And I'm going to skip ahead because we want to get to the learning analytics stuff, and I want to get to this slide. So I'm in charge of the principles for studying research. And I'm really trying to provide this community with a taxonomy and a frameworks to think about how do we study learning? How do we study learning of digital badges? And I'm arguing that whether or not you use the evidence contained in, or whether you choose to use this new form of evidence fundamentally changes the kind of learning. So I'm proposing 6 different really research designs. On the left, you've got research of badges. This is the peer-reviewed piece, summatively studying the impact of badges using conventional forms of evidence. That's a little premature right now since we don't know how to use them. In my opinion, we need more research for badges, really design-based research, formatively trying to improve learning with badges. But what we're beginning to see are these actually formative studies of whole ecosystems of trying to improve them. There's a whole other category of studies, though, where people are using the evidence contained in digital badges in each of those 3 categories. And that's what I propose is proving to be quite transformative. We're just able to do very different kinds of studies. If you're interested in our stuff, if you Google Hickey Haystack, H-A-S-T-A-C, blog, most of our results are up as blog posts at Haystack. And this is one that I've been particularly thrilled of, where I advance those research design principles. There's currently 40 comments on it. Bill Penuel's up there, Michael Olenek, Kathy Davidson. So we're getting this really healthy, vigorous discussion going around these categories. What you see there is my initial attempt to identify either projects or aspects of projects, digital badges, that fall into those categories. So this is the kind of thing I'm really hoping to focus on, which is let's give some structure here. Let's decide what these are instances of so that people who want to do this can find examples of people doing it. Another major finding of our project is that if you look at this, so the way that the existing ecosystem, if you introduce badges into an existing ecosystem versus if you create an ecosystem around existing badges, that is two very, very different animals. Cheryl Grant has a lovely blog post that she recently put up where she talks about 5 different variations of that is really reshaping the way we think about it. But my point is simply that those contextual factors constrain the learning that you can recognize. Those recognition practices in turn constrain your assessment, and that recognition assessment ecosystem is going to impact motivation, whether you want it to or not, and then those together are going to impact what kind of research designs are possible. Within each of these areas, I'm finding, not surprising, this thing that I've been studying much of my career, which is looking at how these enduring tensions, it's most evident in motivation, where I've written about it most, between very traditional empiricist views of learning versus the very antithetical empiricist views and the tensions between them. And I'm seeing evidence that supports my contention that is a broader situative and participatory view can resolve some of those tensions between those two very different ways by treating them both as special cases of situated cognition. And I won't say anything more about that today. Or maybe I will. Let's see here. But one of the things we're trying to do is create this knowledge network. We're building working examples over there on the lower left. We backed off on this a little bit because these are a little cumbersome. But if you notice, one is the assessment principles working examples. These are multimedia artifacts that Jim G. and MacArthur put together. So they cross-reference each other. One is the assessment principles, and the other is the supporter to reporter thing. So if somebody's interested in assessment, they might start with the assessment principles and go look at the working example from supporter to reporter to see how it's embodied. If somebody comes into the space because they're a journalist, they can go over to the assessment principles to look at it. So we've got this research that we're finding is all captured in there. Blog post. Mozilla Foundation is doing a great job building a broader community. One of the things that made me happy was Lisa Dowley at the 3D Game Labs. I asked her for some slides and some input. And when I got her slides, I saw that she had organized her entire talk around her categories of recognizing and learning. And I said, okay. I sent that out to the team and said, you know, well done. This is what we wanted to happen. We're giving structure so that these very different projects have a way of understanding who's doing similar stuff. So here's one of my blog posts is what I'm referring to, the transformative, right? So we talk about summative and formative. Badges have the potential to be truly transformative. People are able to do things that they haven't done before. And my point is that digital badges promise to allow some and force others to transcend existing paradigms of recognizing, assessing, and motivating learning. I think in the end, this may really change what we think of with learning analytics, because if badges transform credentialing, right, how many of you are coders? Stack Overflow badges? Do you have any? No. Yeah, so Stack Overflow is a good example of a badge-driven ecosystem. It's where coders go to ask questions and get answers, and you can't prank it. And if you have certain badges, if you've got the badge for, I don't know, power management in the Android operating system, I don't know, it could be worth a lot of money because the back end of Stack Overflow is an employment agency. You've got to pay like 10 grand to find out who's got that badge so you can poach them away because they're so busy doing work and answering questions, they're not looking for a job. So that's a good example of what we mean by crowdsourcing credentialing. If badges transform assessment, I'll return to this one, but credibility may well supplant validity. And if badges transcend this sort of divide between intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, I've been beating my head against the wall for 15 years with this one, trying to convince people that situated models of motivation have something to offer. And I'm happy to say, definitely making some traction here. Definitely getting a lot more requests for papers and a lot more weight. Now, to use Milan Kundera's distinction in his book, The Joke, he talks about that this hipster wakes up one day and all his life he's been thinking that he's interestingly odd, but realizes he's actually just oddly uninteresting. I think for many people, my motivation work has just been oddly uninteresting, and I'm finding that a lot of people are now saying, it's like, oh, I get it, because it's really hard to embrace a fundamentally individualist model of motivation when knowledge and values and goals are being constructed in social networks the way that they are in these examples I'm showing you. And finally, if badges transform research methods, will design-based research transcend randomized clinical trials. So I'm running a little late here. So Carla put up a blog post where she basically said that, you know, when we talk about validity, we really mean credibility. And I said, oh, rumph. It says right there in my textbook, you know, Jim Popham, I've been with him for 4 editions, and he's changed it a lot, but one thing that doesn't change is that face validity is an unsanctioned form of validity. In his book, Content, Criteria, and Construct Related, I've written papers around Messick's validity structure, but I think Carla's right. I think that whether in my class, so if somebody pranks the leader badge system, if that credibility isn't there, if they know that the person who earned that badge, like sort of paid people off, traded favors, whatever, it doesn't matter whether I done my generalizability studies, whatever, it won't be credible. And she points to this work by B.J. Fogg, where he advances this taxonomy of credibility. And I think in the end, it's probably going to be more useful for thinking about the validity of our evidence. Finally, I'm getting to learning analytics. That's what you're here for. So Phil Piety, one of your graduates, have been, how many of you know Phil? So he's Pam's student and worked with Jay Lemke some. It's a great book. I really like his book. I'm getting a lot of use out of it. We put in this paper to the Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference. Hope it gets accepted. With this taxonomy of, yeah, that's right. Here's the reviews. Did it get accepted yet? So we're proposing this broader notion of educational data sciences because right now you've got your learning analytics focusing on events. This is a time scale, to use Jay Lemke's notions. Over increasingly lengthy time scales, learning is a very immediate thing that's happening. Learner analytics, looking at individual learners. Moving on out, educational data mining, as is often done in the AI tutors. And then institutional research in higher education. And then all the way on out to NCLB-driven reforms. I guess the question, the proposal, is if digital badges, if learning is organized around digital badges, it's very possible that this dream that we articulate in this paper of these otherwise disparate communities with separate journals and separate conferences will find a way to work together, to go back to Pam's notion of boundary objects. Badges may well have the potential to carry this information without losing its meaning. Right, achievement data gets really meaningless to some teachers, right? They don't know what to do with it because it's just this stuff. It's like, so that's the sort of general argument that I want to make about it, that we think that badges have a lot of potential to sort of make more coherence across these otherwise disparate communities. But then they also give us some really cool data. And this is literally this week that I've got my hands on this data. This is Google Analytics. We've tagged the buttons there on the right, and that allowed us to ascertain that out of the 75 people who earned the first practices badge, 41 of them chose to share it out to OBI, or I should say 41 of them clicked on that interface. That's a pretty high number. That's more than half. Whereas Purdue, you know, students don't even know they have badges. We did something right. These students want, at least they're interested in, can they share them out? It's a little cumbersome if you haven't used the first time, but we see that 29 of them shared them out over Facebook. We see emails, so this is the kind of data that we're getting and just beginning to figure out what to do with. I'm love to get suggestions, questions. Earlier question was great. We're gonna redo this all again in the summer and build in much more systematic. We can see here those people on the left are actually students, and we can see that, you know, one individual is responsible for 15 visits. So 15 people came into our site after clicking on their badge in an external space. We are able to see attrition. I think that, you know, attrition, you know, when you're asking yourself, did somebody really, are they still in the course? I don't know, but if you separate it out from, did they get the badge, it's kind of a nice marker. And we can see here, for example, that we see, for instance, the attrition. These numbers are a little low to say that these are significant, but we can see that the secondary educators dropped by half from the first to the second badge, whereas there was very little attrition for the college faculty. Over here we can see, much to my surprise, most of the hits coming from Facebook were actually from Facebook mobile. That was a big surprise to me. I did not have any videos, but people tell me people love videos in MOOC so that they can watch them on their phone on the way home from work. We're able to make some, we can see here, 1 minute, can I have 1 minute?
Sure. So
Okay.
we're at 1:15. Of course, if you need to leave, feel free. And take 1 minute to
Okay,
finish up.
great. So here we see, so 8 of those students were enrolled in 4 credit classes. I said to my faculty when they said, really? You're going to like free, they're going to get mad. Well, how's this going to work? I don't know, we'll see. One thing we see is that only one of the leader badges was awarded to a 4 credit student, the little asterisk there. We see here though, we would expect that someone who gets the leader badge is more engaged than other students. Of course they got more promotions because that's how they got them, but indeed we see that the people who got the leader badges there indeed had more comments associated with their badges than the rest of them over here. We can make assertions like that. I'll just wrap up. This is Nicole and Ugochi had this massive data set from Chicago Summer of Learning, and they're looking at, for instance, what you see there is, so my colleague Kylie Pepler was part of Summer of Learning, and she had her cluster of activities that she developed, so those are linked by a solid line. She's studying students moving back and forth between these various ecosystems and looking at those patterns. That's really formatively useful. That is a great example. That is going to be my quintessential example of what we mean of using the data contained in the badges to improve that ecosystem. And I think that is, oh, I don't have time for this, but I'm really interested in the scaling issue. Our other paper to lack, thank you in advance, no, is making the argument that we don't want to leap. This kind of participatory learning is hard to do. How many of you know about the meltdown in Coursera at Georgia Tech? Has anyone seen? Yeah, it's just a complete disaster. This woman tried to do a course on online learning, which the headline on Slate says, goes laughably awry, because she tried to do this kind of interactive participatory learning at scale without having first figured it out in small scale, and it was just a total disaster. We're saying small to big to massive. So this is just a summary of our LAC submission where we describe how we've taken these various course features that we refined in the small intuitive context, scaled them up to the big and systematic, and now we're in the process of making them massive and algorithmic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.